Hi, we're Oxfam Conservation, and this is the Shoe Room Sessions. Good morning, Georgia.
Good morning.
Welcome to the Shoe Room.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
Can you tell people who you are and what you do?
I am Georgia Dent and I am Chief Executive of Somerset Wildlife Trust.
Perfect. My absolute favourite question in the Shoe Room, and the one that we might not even get past as a question, can you take us through your live content page? So if the book was on the shelf, we reached for it and pulled it down, opened it up, what are those key chapters that have got you to this point in your life? Both upbringing and career and everything.
That's a good one to kick off with, isn't it? Grew up in Somerset, grew up in Wincanton. Spent early childhood roaming Bruton and the surrounding countryside with my nan and my mum. My nan absolutely loved just walking in woodlands and naming all the wildflowers and things like that. So got a real kind of love of outdoors from my nan. Then
Sounds like that was the start. That was the connection.
that was the start.
Yeah.
And my mum, my mum loves being outdoors. She's a very keen gardener. Doesn't like bats. Interestingly, we used to live our back garden backed onto the Wincanton recreation ground, so there were a lot of bats flying up and down at night, and if she had to walk down it, she'd which is very funny. But apart from that, she loves nature and loves being outside. Yeah.
Okay.
Good formative years, good childhood in Somerset. University in London, went to King's College London. Nothing to do with nature whatsoever. Did United States and Latin American studies with Spanish.
Because?
Well, I was going to do English and history at Salford, and then I saw this degree, and I got a year in America. It was my third year, so I spent half the year in California and the other half in Mexico. Why wouldn't you do that? Really?
I mean, yeah, no, I get it. I get the draw of the US, definitely.
So that was fun. Bournemouth for a few years. Then back to London for a master's in understanding and securing human rights.
What was the draw to go from the sort of undergrad to that being the area for the masters? What was the pull?
So my life's goal was always at that point actually to work for Amnesty International. I'd done a lot of studies as part of the degrees around human rights, my undergrad degree, the sort of South American dictators and things like that. So that was kind of where that came from, and I was always going to work for Amnesty International. So still on the to-do list at some point, probably. No, it's not. So then went and did human rights, and then ended up going from there to working for a youth homeless charity in Birmingham, and from there to working at Oxfam as a campaigner, and that's where the environment came back in. So I worked on Oxfam's first ever climate change campaign and supported the development of that, which brought back in the whole environment sort of interest and passion. And from there went to Northfield Ecocentre, which was started up by Central England Quakers. Basically, they had a building they didn't know what to do with, and they said, "Can you turn this into an eco-centre?" And I said, "Do you have a brief for that?" And they said, "No, not really." So they refurbished it with air source heat pumps and underfloor heating and solar panels and things like that.
Did the absence of a brief scare you or excite you?
A bit of both, dependent on the day.
Okay.
But it was exciting because it meant that we could just think really creatively about what we wanted to do and what the purpose of an eco-centre in sort of South Birmingham was. What was it actually aiming to do? So this was 2010, somewhere around there.
And where was environment and sustainability in the sort of the public consciousness compared to where it is now?
I think we were still at the point where people were saying, you'll never get everyone recycling. There was that sort of point. So there were pioneers. We had some amazing people that we worked with whose houses were completely kitted out with absolutely everything. But for most people, it wasn't really in their consciousness. Particularly, so Northfield is an area of Birmingham that is brilliant. I lived there for 13 years. I love it, but socio-economically, one of the more deprived parts of the city. And it wasn't really on anyone's priority list.
No, we lived in and around Birmingham for a while, and I think it's very Marmite to people. People who don't know it as a city particularly well will have preconceived ideas, but the ones that have actually spent time there kind of love the place, I think, has been my experience.
Absolutely, really warm, warm people. And even though it's a big city, it's like lots of little villages together, isn't it? And you kind of know your area and you know your people. So yeah, both my children were born in Birmingham. So very, very fond of Birmingham. Had really good years there. Yeah, including working for the Quakers, which was really interesting, and got a lot of admiration and respect for the Quakers and what they're doing, and they're really kind of leading communities in environmental issues as well.
And what was the business culture like working in that environment compared to, say, a wildlife trust?
I learned a lot from how they conduct Quaker business and Quaker meetings. One of the things that I took away from it is when they hold a meeting, they use Quaker worship rules. So you have silence at the beginning and end of every meeting to just reflect on what the purpose of the meeting is at the start of the meeting and what you might want to get from it. You can be spiritual, but you don't have to be spiritual. It's up to you. And then at the end of the meeting, you have quiet to reflect on what's happened and what you take away from the meeting. And I found initially quite weird, because it's not how I've ever worked. But I actually came to really enjoy that part of the meeting, because it was just nice to have a bit of quiet time in your brain.
So Amazon do the same thing, right? So with a slight tweak, the first 20 minutes of their meeting, everyone reads the documentation again in silence on the basis of people don't prep ahead of time for a meeting, and then it's a 40-minute discussion. So it's not a reflection time, but you do get that quiet focus period at the start of the meeting, and then it progresses through.
Yeah, which I think is really valuable, because often you arrive at a meeting and you've had car trouble like today, or
straight from the last one.
You're straight from the last one, or you're rushing and you're a little bit late, and you go straight in and you perhaps enter the meeting in a slightly weird frame of mind. So it actually does help you to just focus and collect your thoughts. But the other thing that I really took from the Quakers is that they have this kind of process where if something has been said in the meeting, you don't need to say it again. So often you're in a meeting when people go, "Oh, I'd just like to echo what so-and-so said," and they say the exact same thing again. So that doesn't happen, which is
and is it actively shut down if someone doesn't know that and tries to?
So they have a clerk rather than a chair. So the clerk's role is to get the sense of the meeting and how they record the minutes. It's to reflect the spirit and the sense of the meeting. So they will, yes, sort of interject and say, I think that point's already been made, but always very calmly and very politely. But the other thing that they do is they're not allowed to respond directly to a point. So you pause in between each person's contribution and reflect on what you might want to say. And then, so you don't get into a kind of head-to-head, which it can also happen in meetings if people disagree. So you're not responding directly to the person opposite you who's just made their point. You are then building on the sense of the meeting and where you think you need to take it. And so it's a really nice sort of calm environment. Obviously, there are occasionally heated discussions. People are passionate, and they're still people. But it's a really nice way.
That's fascinating. And then was it on to Birmingham Wildlife Trust after that?
It was, yeah. So the Ecocentre, we ended up with a team of energy assessors. So we did, I'm a trained energy assessor, domestic and non-domestic energy assessments. We set up a bike hub. So we actually got, what's it called? The People's Millions. We won £50,000 through a TV vote, which was quite fun. We marketed that by wearing the morph suits. Me and my friends wore green morph suits, and I had a bowler hat and she had a tutu, and we went round Northfield. And to start with, nobody knew what we were doing, so there were all these spottings and on social media. Who are these green people? What are they doing? We turned up like at a fire station and had pictures with the fire service and things like that. So that went on for a few months, and then we sort of told people what we were doing and that we were raising money for Northfield Ecocentre to set up
guerrilla marketing campaign. Love it.
Yeah, no, it was really good fun. Really good fun. We loved sort of checking social media every day. And like, who are these people? Does anyone know? It got people really talking. We won some money through that to buy the bikes, and we set up Cycle South Brum. which was in combination with Northfield Town Centre Partnership, which supported people once the Rover factory shut down to get them back into work, so sort of skills and training. So the bike hub was to enable people to access employment, but so they could get a free bike, either giveaway or long-term hire. But then we ended up doing sort of cycling instruction and things, and now they do cycling instruction for people with autism and all sorts of things. So it's still going, it's brilliant. But we also ended up with 3 community gardens, so that's kind of where the jump then to the Wildlife Trust came. So we ended up managing 3 community gardens with beehives and engaging with children in local schools and bringing them in to do forest schools. I'm also a trained forest school practitioner, so I used to do forest school sessions, and we did food growing. We set up good grub, so we used to grow the food and then teach people how to grow food on a low budget with the Northfield Food Bank. So it was all the kind of real community connections and things, but it was the community gardens, I guess, that made me kind of, and doing the forest schools training, that then when the job at Birmingham Black Country Wildlife Trust came up, made me think, yeah, that's where I need to go next.
So take us to that chapter. How long was that period with Birmingham?
4.5 years.
Okay, and the key things that stand out from that time?
Really, it was brilliant. It's a great charity. Obviously, all the Wildlife Trusts are independent.
For those of you just listening to this, amazing smile from Georgia when you mentioned a time doing this.
Yeah, no, it's just amazing people at the Wildlife Trusts in general, and the Birmingham Black Country Wildlife Trust. It was a challenge. It's a smaller wildlife trust, so financially it was more of a challenge. But I think it's in a really good place now with the new chief exec. They've got some really exciting projects. So the big project there was nature improvement areas, which we don't really talk about anymore, but they were quite big a few years ago. So Birmingham Black Country was, I presume still is, a designated nature improvement area. So we did a lot of work with local authorities on council-owned land and doing meadow creation. Lots of triple SI sort of green hay collected with in partnership with the local farmers.
Can you explain to people what green hay is?
So you kind of take the cut, and it's got all the seeds. You do it at the right time of year, so it's got all the seeds and things in, and then you spread it out over where you want to create a meadow. In essence, so we had hundreds of volunteers helping us across many sites. I think we did 30 or 40 a year. I can't quite remember the numbers now. But yeah, so that was a brilliant project, and obviously lots of partnerships, lots of volunteering, lots of people engagement.
You mentioned the volunteering. I think one of the things the Wildlife Trust do amazingly well is the engagement with and use of volunteers. I think people think it's easy. It really isn't. Managing, orchestrating, organising and keeping a group of volunteers engaged, present, safe and healthy is a real challenge and a skill, and I think they do it brilliantly.
We couldn't do what we do, any of the wildlife trusts, without volunteers. I think we at Somerset say we've got about 350 regular
That's
volunteers,
amazing.
and then others who kind of come in at other times for specific things. So it's essential. We couldn't do what we do, and they're so motivated and so skilled, and we've got a volunteer in Somerset who's trained himself up to be able to identify grasshoppers. That level of skill and that level of detail is incredible.
Some of George's team are in the room as well, and they're smiling with that story being told, because each volunteer, each person that interacts with the environment, often with the trust, had their own little special story of that experience, be it a species or a place, and I think it's just magical, those connections.
Absolutely, yeah. No, the volunteers are amazing, and the passion that people bring and the commitment that they have to wildlife, to nature, and to the Wildlife Trust.
So I remember sort of because what you were doing in Birmingham was getting a lot of. I was working in and around Birmingham at the time. Lots of positivity, lots of press about the Wildlife Trust, and the next big announcement is you were going to Somerset.
Yes.
So talk to us about that change.
I guess I had always felt that I would go back to Somerset at some point, and whilst I loved Birmingham, every time I left Birmingham and went out into the countryside, I thought, I kind of miss this. I think I'd assumed I would retire back to Somerset, if I'm honest. But then I remember going to a meeting early on when I joined the Birmingham Black Country Wildlife Trust, or actually it's called the Wildlife Trust for Birmingham and the Black Country. I should get it right. With Simon Nash, who was the chief executive of Somerset Wildlife Trust at the time. He and I were on the same training course. And I remember at the time he said, I think I've been there for about 12 years now. It might be time to start looking for something else. And it took, obviously, him about 4 years to start looking for something else, but eventually he did. And I remember at the time thinking, just keep an eye on that, just in case. So yeah, it came up. The post, I remember being advertised just before Christmas. And I messaged my husband at the time and said, I'm going to go for this. And he went, do it. So that was it. No looking back, no regrets.
So we had Nick Bruce White here recently, and he talked about his journey to ended up in Devon, and he talked about a meeting with Harry Barton, the outgoing chief exec, who said a very similar thing, although Harry's was months, not years. Yeah. And I think it shows that importance of, if you know a geography, a role or a career that you're interested in, be around it, associate with it. Like there's still processes and interviews and things to do, but knowing it's available is such a big part of it, and you knowing about the potential of going home was really exciting. But the prospect of moving, that's got to be quite daunting with a family and stuff.
Yeah, it's not an easy process, is it? Not like when I remember going from London to Bournemouth when I was in my 20s, and I had a black sack and a CD player, like that was it really. And so moving from Birmingham with 2 children, a dog, a cat, all the furniture of the house. This
is an appropriate time for me to apologise to my wife for making us move several times. Sorry, Helen. It's not the easiest thing, right?
No, it's not. And actually, I ended up coming down and staying with a friend in Somerset during the week, and the children stayed in Birmingham with my husband.
How long did you have that period for?
So I started the beginning of April 2019, and I think we moved end of July. So. Yeah, a few months, good few months.
Yeah, I did similar for sort of 4 or 5, I think, and it's horrid because you're not living in either place.
Yeah.
You're kind of existing between the two, and I think, but the reality is, and again, for a lot of people that listen to this are quite young in their career or early, and that's the reality sometimes, right? Things don't line up perfectly in terms of a time period, and you have to make that step and then let things fall into place afterward.
If you think it's the right thing and it's something you want to make happen, then it's worth doing, isn't it? Yeah.
Did it feel immediately like coming home when you...
Yeah, loved it. I've always loved coming back into Somerset. You come down the M5 or whatever and you pass the Quantock Hills, and it's always felt like coming home. Yeah, definitely.
It's one of those things I don't have... I'm very jealous at people who have a real connection to a specific place. So I grew up in North Lincolnshire, East Yorkshire. It was pretty miserable, and then moved around a lot with different jobs. So I know lots of places, but have no real emotional connection to one. If anywhere, probably it's increasingly Devon, but that's been the sort of last... We lived here for 3 or 4 years, and my son was born in Devon and has got the surf hair to work with that. But we're in Worcestershire now, but I don't have that one place of going home. It's just wherever my family is at that point in time. So your connection to Somerset, and our friend Dave Throop is Mr. Worcester, so his connection to Worcester, the same thing. I do envy that in people having that experience that they can sort of draw back to.
Yeah, I guess both my parents are from Somerset as well, and I believe my parents met at a Wurzel gig at Wincanton Racecourse. Like, you can't really get any more Somerset than that, can you? So,
no.
Yeah, our family is a Somerset family. It's, well, my dad's mum's side. My dad's side is American, so a bit further away. But
was that the first draw? Why interested in the year abroad in America? Was it that familiar connection?
Yes, it was actually, yeah. I was determined when I was about 17, 18 that I would live in America, and I could have got, if I'd have applied for it, which I never did, a visa, because my dad's got a dual nationality, so he's got an American passport.
Nice. So when you arrived back in Somerset to take the job here, was there any immediate differences in the style, the trusts and the ways of working? How did that look and feel?
Yeah, so many of the issues are very similar. Obviously, you know, the depletion of nature is all over, unfortunately, and working to help people connect with nature. But yes, there's lots of big differences. So Somerset Wildlife Trust has 70 nature reserves that we're
Wow, that's an amazing
for.
footprint.
In Birmingham, we had 9 that we managed, but we did most of the work on other people's land, so on the local authority's land through the nature improvement area work. So that's quite a big difference. There's a lot more engagement working with and supporting landowners and farmers in Somerset, farmers in particular. Obviously there are farmers in Birmingham and the Black Country, but not quite as many. So the kind of land advice and the support and that kind of partnership is much more predominant in Somerset. And obviously Somerset has a coast, which Birmingham definitely does not.
I think that's often forgotten about Somerset. I think people don't realise the prominence of the coast.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think when I joined the trust, actually, the Somerset Wildlife Trust, we were running a project where I think the trust was saying we'd never really focused on the coast before, and we realised that we should. It was that kind of narrative. They had a fantastic person surveying the intertidal habitat. So there's now an intertidal habitat map of Somerset's coast, which is really exciting to explore on the website.
Pete, good shout out, check out the website. For ecologists, and we have some in the room, those sort of intertidal ranges and the sort of interaction of different habitats are some of the most exciting for nature, right? They're the ones that really show us different variety.
Absolutely, really important, and some fantastic species, often quite small. But going back to volunteers, we've got amazing shore search and sea search volunteers. There's a huge sort of team of them that go out regularly. And the shore search volunteers, and they put down their kind of square and then
quadrants.
Yeah, absolutely, and spend.
That's a throwback to uni field work for me.
But yeah, we've got an amazing team that do that out on the coast. And
in terms of scale of the teams, how did they differ in terms of number of people you had in Birmingham versus at Somerset?
But how many did we have in Birmingham? We had possibly about 30. Which when I joined Somerset Wildlife Trust, there was 37 in April 2019. We've now got 95, 97.
Wow.
Like that.
And people say we're scaling fast. That's a pretty rapid rise in terms of people and engagement.
Yeah, we've grown quite significantly. So writing the Wilder Somerset 2030 strategy, which we did in 2021, I think really focused everybody and enabled us to sort of look at larger scale project development and things like that. We had a clear intention to grow, because we recognised when we wrote our strategy we need to be doing things differently. If we keep doing the same, even though what we were doing was really good, we're never going to meet the challenges of the ecological emergency that we really need to be taking on. So yeah, there was definite intention to grow. But it's been brilliant. There's always a few teething pains with growth as well, which I'm sure you're well aware of too. But yeah, the staff team are fantastic, and the volunteer team we've already talked about are amazing. And we've got really good trustees as well who are really supportive and behind the ambition that we have.
That's awesome. And we're very fortunate that we've got land in sort of 8 different places across the country. So we have a different lens in how people's relationships with the environment works. You've worked all over the place as well. How would you describe the differences you found in terms of how local communities in a place connect with the environment in different ways?
So on one level, I think communities do have, generally speaking, there are at least a core of a community that is connected to their environment, wherever that may be. Obviously, working in a city like Birmingham, you've got very built-up urban areas with very little green space that it's difficult for people to make that connection with, and people from very diverse sort of backgrounds who have who come to the city with a different relationship to nature in the first place. We had a site, or they still do have a site, called Eco Park in Birmingham, which is in Schoolheath, and it really is an oasis in a very, very built up urban area. And when I was there, we had about 8,000 child school visits a year, because the schools didn't really have any green space surrounding them, so that it was they were really keen to bring the kids there, and sometimes the parents would want to come as well. So obviously if you've got less access, less green space around you, it's more difficult to build up that connection. So it's really important that there are those spaces available and people have access to them outside of their community. But I do think communities, generally speaking, have a real sort of sense of connection with their local area. And I guess that's the approach that we're taking now with Team Wilder, which is a National Wildlife Trust initiative. I know you're going to be speaking to Debbie Tan soon, spearheaded by the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust, which is really about connecting into communities and supporting them to do what they want to do for their environment.
That's such an important difference, isn't it?
Yes. It really is. It is very different to how we've traditionally operated, where we've sort of gone, oh, we want to do this here, and you get project funding, and then you essentially set up and put your flag there and go, come and join us, come and do this thing with us. And Team Wilder is really about saying, okay, we'll listen to you. What is it? What's important to you? What is the environment that you have that you're proud of, and what is it that you want to create, and how can we support you, and how can we enable you to do that? And then it's about skills, resources, inspiration, creativity, facilitation, training, those sorts of things, not us doing it for them.
In that listening process, which is super important, it's one of the reasons why whenever we acquire a new piece of land, and our model is very different, so we own all the land we work on exclusively. They are privately held businesses rather than necessarily a charitable or a trust-based model. But we try and listen for an entire year, both to the environment and to the people that are there locally. But there's often not one view, there's 10 views. So what's been your experience, or how would you help us understand, how do you find the prevailing view and the right one for nature from those 10 or 20 voices?
So what Team Wilder does is adopt community organising principles. So we actually now, all wildlife trusts have staff trained in community organising. People have probably heard of that from Barack Obama, who was probably the most famous community organiser, which is about sort of spending that time listening and then helping to sort of play back to the community what it is that you've heard, and trying to sort it into priorities, really. I'm not trained in community organising, I should say, so I'm not an expert in that approach, but our staff that do it incredibly well.
If we've got an amazing community organiser out there who wants to come on and talk to us, please do, because I'm amazed at how we get to the point of capturing the fifth voice, the most prevalent one, as opposed to the loudest. Because often I think you get the one person who has a view at either end of the spectrum who's incredibly loud, and often they get heard the most because of that volume, and you can end up with an outcome that isn't right for people or the environment, but is for that one person, and that's sometimes really difficult, I think.
Oh yeah, that definitely happens a lot in all sorts of situations. It's a skill to be able to sort of work behind that and acknowledge that, those loud voices, there's a reason why they're loud, and it might be that they feel that even though they've been loud for some time, they haven't really been heard. It's a skill to make those people feel heard and valued and recognise and confirm that you've heard what they're saying, but then also to be able to get behind that and hear what the other voices are saying, and then sort of filter it and be able to prioritise it and play it back as well, and this is what I've heard, and this is how I think this is coming across, and this is what I think it's saying. But as I say, I'm not an expert in that. But
we'll definitely do another episode focused on that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So do you think do you think the divide urban to rural is made out to be bigger than it is in terms of relationships with the natural world?
Sometimes I think it can be, yeah. So even though in Somerset, obviously, we've got the landscape. So in Birmingham, you've got amazing sites, Birmingham and the Black Country, amazing nature reserves. But what you don't have is the biggest sort of natural landscapes that, like the Somerset Levels or the Mendip Hills, where they're...
And scale's so important for nature,
isn't it? Really important.
And connectivity as well.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that people are always more connected, because there's loads of reports out there that living in a rural area, you might be surrounded by nature, but you don't connect into it.
That's true. Landscape connectivity does not necessarily mean people connectivity to place. Often the reverse, right? Because you're spread out, you're further apart.
Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting.
Even so, we've got a project working on the coast, and for the last few years we've run wild beach sessions, which is taking local school children to the beach and delivering kind of forest school style, but on the beach activities and getting them to recognise sort of what's in their coastal environment, which is fantastic. But the number of children who live a mile away from the coast who have never been to Somerset is really quite shocking. Yeah. So just because it's there doesn't mean people visit it, use it, or feel connected.
I suppose we learned that in COVID, right? People's connection with the natural world spiked as a result of having the access taken away. If you've always got it, you don't need to use it because you always assume it's going to be there.
Yeah.
It's a bit like if you end up with a water outage at home, or you turn the tap on and suddenly it's not there. You're like, oh wow, that should be there, and you only realise that when it's gone.
Oh yeah, I mean in a different way. But when I lived in London, I never went into the city centre. I do the tourist things much more often now that I don't live in London than I ever did when I was in London, because it's just there.
You're absolutely right. So we've got Esme, our amazing ecologist, in the room who helped me prep some of the questions for you. So we're going into the Esme territory on this now,
Okay.
Definitely. One of your targets is 1 in 4 people taking action for nature.
Yes.
What does that look like? Bring that to life for us. How do you hope to achieve that?
Yeah, so that is a Team Wilder target. So all wildlife trusts nationally have adopted that as a target, and there's a lot of research and science behind that target. So it's a social science, a sort of philosophy, really, and it's based on a social tipping point. So if you can get 25% of people visibly taking an action, you reach a social tipping point. That means that it becomes normal. And so that's really what we're trying to do with that target, is create that social tipping point. So it's about people visibly taking positive action. And that could range from, people creating hedgehog highways in their streets, to volunteering, to campaigning, to, there's a huge range of actions. We're not being prescriptive about what those actions are, but the key is that it's visible. Other people need to see that it's happening, that people are doing it. If you think, something like recycling, I mentioned when I was working at the Ecocentre, and everyone said that's never going to happen. It's never going to be normal. It is now. There's a number of push and pull factors as to how that, but most people now recycle. That's the sort of philosophy, the science behind it. What that actually looks like, obviously, it's going to be incredibly difficult to measure specifically. So it is about the sort of the community projects that we've talked about, people going in and getting communities taking action. It's about our national campaigns and our local campaigns and getting people signed up and involved in that. There's a whole sort of range of engagement things that we can measure. Excuse me. But I mean, the main thing will be when it starts becoming normal that people take action.
Yeah, so a couple of things came to mind when you were describing that. I often talk about it from a business culture perspective. If you have the bulk of a business behaving in a certain way, if the most people are high performing, the culture leads to high performance. It's that tipping point. If you had it the other way, if you had 25% of a team that was lazy and disengaged and underperforming, the whole team's going to be in a difficult spot. So that makes absolute sense in that regard. And the role modelling bit of it becoming normal as well. I'm a data geek by background, but some things you don't really need to measure. If we're arguing, well, is it 20% or 21 or 25? As long as more people are doing this,
Exactly.
The actual number and the metric isn't important. It's the sense and the feeling. It's a bit like saying, how much you love your children. Lots. I don't need to put a number on it. No one's asking for that. We're just happy it's a thing.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that engagement is so important. One of the things we have heard traveling around the country. So key bit, I think I've seen a big increase in people's connection with the natural world and wanting to be part of a solution around climate change and biodiversity. We still see a small section of people who will go, well, it's not my problem. I can't do anything. The problem's too big. One of the ones we've had a couple of times is, well, I'm going to die anyway. It's not my problem. How can we respond to those people who are in that spot? What would your view on that type of...
So I think the first thing is you're never going to bring everybody with you, and if you try, you're never going to make progress. So there's the kind of 80-20 rule, isn't there? That there are some people you're never going to change their minds, and that's okay.
Your 80-20 is absolutely right. So we're currently at 95-5 and we still invest time trying to change the 5, and it's what are we doing? We're not going to just smile and say thank you.
Work with the people. You'll have some absolute pioneers out there. You know, there's a whole behaviour change theory, isn't it? But you've got your pioneers who, you know, they need very little from you. Maybe a little bit of encouragement, a little bit of recognition every so often that they're doing a good thing, but let them crack on and let them be your ambassadors. You know, for us, we're looking for wilder champions who are our ambassadors, who are out there doing their thing, maybe with a little bit of support, but you know, we don't really need to.
And is that a moniker you actually give them? You recognise and say this person's a...
If they want to be.
Okay.
Other people, you know, they're doing their own thing with a different organisation, different way of looking at it. They might be working for a different, you know, there's RSPB and all these other amazing charities that are doing and organisations doing amazing things. But it's recognising that those people are out there and they're doing their thing and they know where we are if they need us, but let them crack on. And then you've got people who perhaps don't know what to do, but they know they want to do something. They're the people that we can really work with and invest in and spend some time with and train up and skill up so that they can be those pioneers, those ambassadors as well. And then you've got, you know, a group of people who perhaps aren't really aware but have a vague notion or are starting to hear stuff in the media, and they're the ones where you can start to educate and bring on. So it's a path, it's a ladder. It's a ladder of engagement, they call it. So it's moving people along that ladder. We're recognising that there's always going to be a group of people who don't want to get on the first step and leave them to it.
I like that. So one of the other things that flagged in our research was a quote from the Somerset Gazette where you were quoted as saying, what will make the change is the political will at all levels and the investment in delivery that will follow. So what's your view of how private investment can help conservation in the environment sector?
I think it's going to be, it's really important. So I think that quote was in the context of, do we need more strategies? There was something around that came from. And, you know, I think I was saying we have got lots of strategies. We need now to invest in the delivery.
I completely agree. We need to just do some things, which is the whole premise behind oxygen conservation. Let's get on and do. There's been various studies looking at the funding gap between sort of targets and strategies set and funding available. It's in the billions, can't recall the figure now. It's a massive number.
It's massive.
Agreed, yeah.
Massive. Government funding isn't going to fill that gap, is it, with all the other pressures and things and things that are...
I think I'd go as far as saying it probably shouldn't.
No, I think you're probably right, you know, so... And the private sector, I mean, everybody relies on nature, let's face it, and most businesses' core resource has some element in the natural world, and all businesses, no matter how good they are at looking at their environmental impact, have an impact on the environment. So for sure they should be investing. Yes, there are ways to make sure that it's not greenwash, and that's really important too, and that's something that we spend a lot of time talking about. And having good due diligence, good targets, measurable, scientifically based targets around carbon reductions and things like that, and then making sure that they're monitoring and actually progressing towards them and they're not just tokenistic. That's really important. But of course businesses need to be investing in nature and the natural environment because they live and operate in this world as well, and they're the ones, you know, we're all going to be impacted if we don't do something.
And if we go to the other side of that quote, the relation to the sort of political world, I was quoted a little while ago saying I think this will be the last general election that isn't fought exclusively on environmental issues. Now, that was almost a hopeful statement in the bad side of the equation. The climate is going to deteriorate more rapidly than we thought it would, and we're already seeing that with global temperatures peaking above 1.5 over for 12 months now. Extreme weather is daily across the UK at the moment. So another 5 or 6 years, I think we will have a complete dialogue that is putting the environment at the forefront of what we're talking about. I actually think it's more in the conversation of this election than I thought it would be. What's your views on as we enter an election year?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things that people are concerned about, obviously, at the moment, you know, lots of really important big issues. But I do think people are increasingly aware. We actually did a webinar last week on the general election, started talking to people about how they might engage with the candidates and the sorts of questions to ask.
That feels like a very new approach from a wildland trust perspective. Would that have happened pre-Craig's leadership, do you think?
I think we were getting there anyway. Yeah. There was a recognition that we needed to do more to enable and support people, but I think the kind of Team Wilder approach that's come in from Hampshire, and Craig, who's obviously a campaigner, and we've got quite a new cohort of chief execs across the Wildlife Trust as well. There's quite a lot.
The group feel, so from an outside perspective looking in, just feel braver and more confident with their voice from a campaigning and an opinion perspective, which I think is great and much needed.
Yeah, and we do have a new national strategy which we kind of collectively wrote over lockdown on various Zoom, which is really good and ambitious and talks about being bold and speaking in a bold voice. And I think then, even before Craig, we had a good couple of chief exec meetings where we said we've got to stand up and speak much more loudly about the things that are important.
Yes, because the ill-informed people who want to destroy the planet, they don't mind being loud.
Exactly that. And I think, we are collectively, Wildlife Trusts are evidence-based, we're science-led, and scientists are fantastic, but they are slightly reluctant to commit to things unless they can be absolutely certain, and you can't be absolutely certain in science.
No, we talked about it at the break, didn't we?
Yeah.
Very little is certain.
Always a margin of error. And that I remember being in meetings with other chief execs and saying, economists will sort of spout off all sorts of figures that they're never really held to.
Nope.
But decisions are made based on those. So we are as evidence-based as we possibly can be, and we need to be much more confident in that and speak out. And we were talking about it on the webinar that we held. The Wildlife Trust have got nearly 1 million members. That's even just with the Wildlife Trust, that's more than any political party has got as members. If you then add in the RSPB and the National Trust and the other environmental organisations and the memberships that they have, we are a really powerful voice. And collectively, if we all use that during the campaigning of the general election to raise the issues that are really important to us, then that's what politicians all respond to, because they respond to those who shout loudest, don't they? As we were just talking about. So we need to be shouting very loudly and be making a lot of noise.
And as a member of the Wildlife Trust, I'm very, very glad you're doing that. Do you aspire to see Somerset as a front runner in nature recovery on that basis? Do you think you've got a key role to play nationally?
Well, I hope we will. If we're not a key role nationally, as long as we're making an impact in Somerset, which is where we need to be focused, and it doesn't matter. It's that's not the ambition, is to have a key role nationally. But I think we are doing some exciting things that I hope people can learn from. So Honeygar is our. I know you'll get to Honeygar.
Well, my segue to then that you just stole from you were doing amazing things locally, which are inspiring nationally.
Right. Okay.
Because Honeygar is such an amazing example.
Exactly that. Yeah. So Honeygar's been a fantastic project for the Wildlife Trust, and a very different one from how we've previously operated. So for people, it's on our website. But yeah, we bought a farm. On the Somerset Levels and Moors, that was a dairy farm, quite intensively farmed. It's about 81 hectares. And we are trying to restore as much as is possible on a site of that size, ecosystem function. And it's low in peatland. It's been dried, drained within an inch of its life. The peatland, we've been monitoring for greenhouse gas fluxes, and it's very heavily emitting carbon. And so what we're trying to do is re-wet it without having any major impacts on our neighbour farmers, and monitoring how that changes over time to see what habitats form, which species come, and how that hopefully has a positive impact on carbon storage. And so that's been really interesting in and of itself. But the interest that we've had from others has been quite phenomenal. For the first couple of years, I think myself and our head of nature recovery felt like our main job was Honeygar tour guides. you know, taking groups of all sorts of people, from politicians to local farmers to, you know, all sorts.
Having done so, it's so important, but I don't think people realise how much time it takes to do those things, in the planning, the preparation, the safe delivery, and of your time, literally, because people who want to come and see do want to hear from you in terms of what has happened there, and you only have so many days.
Absolutely, but we took Honeygard on knowing that it was going to be a project that we would learn a lot from, that we would make mistakes, but that we would share the learning as widely as possible with those that were interested, and including the mistakes. And
why did you feel able and comfortable to share the mistakes?
What we want is Honeygard to influence the management of the wider landscape. And if we pretend that everything's just plain sailing and easy, nobody's going to believe us, for one thing. But also, you learn probably more from mistakes than you do from success, don't you?
I completely agree, and I love that. And actually, that's something that I had to learn throughout my career. So, I had a very northern, working class, old school upbringing where men didn't talk, they never apologised, you didn't admit you got anything wrong ever. Leadership role models for my generation with the Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzeneggers of this world, that's what you were positioned as. And I still have a father who has not apologised for anything in his entire life and wouldn't admit it was wrong. But as I've come through my career, learning that actually, no, people don't want leaders who pretend they know everything and never make a mistake. They want that honesty and the mistakes and the transparency of, because it makes us human and real. And that's been a key thing for OC. We share the failures, the learnings, the mistakes, and the positives and the successes. Because if you don't, you can't be honest or have any integrity about the successes either. So
no, absolutely. And you know, what we're trying to do is also contribute to the science and evidence around all of this. And in that, you've got to admit what's a failure.
Yeah, don't let perfect be the enemy of better.
No, exactly.
You've got to keep moving. I personally love Honeygard for a number of reasons, but the timeline of your involvement in that project pretty much mirrors the timeline of OC. So I remember us speaking earlier when you were just about to buy the site, as we hadn't even bought a site yet, and you were sharing your experiences of that process, and which really helped inform how we've gone about buying land. So there's a real synergy of those two things.
Yeah, definitely.
What next for the trust in the next whatever time period you pick? And I'm going to ask you the question about you personally as well. So what comes next?
So we're still delivering the strategy. It goes up to 2030. We've got a 3-year delivery plan. So we do have ambitions around scaling up more of what we're doing, more of Team Wilder, more engaging with communities, more supporting communities, more land acquisitions. Honeygard is trialling and testing the carbon credit market as well. So we have sold carbon credits on Honeygard. And we want to be trialling some of the other green finance mechanisms, because what we think is really important is for the trust to sort of test these things out. If we're saying to other landowners you should be looking at, you know, a whole farm business, which perhaps in some areas has slightly less opportunity for agricultural output because you're on the Somerset levels, for example, and the peatland's going to have to be wetter in order to stop the amount of carbon that's coming off the levels. You're going to have to supplement that with sort of green finance mechanisms, and we need to be willing to test those out before we say to other landowners who have less risk capacity, if you like, because they've got a margin. You know, farm businesses can be very difficult to keep in profit. We need to be willing to test those. So we want to try biodiversity net gain. That's the next one. We've got some hopeful acquisitions coming on that will test biodiversity net gain, and also the voluntary biodiversity market. As you'll be aware, there's the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, TNFD, and early adopters of that. So looking at how we might engage with that over the coming years and learn from that in exactly the same model that we've described with Honeygard, sort of test and learn and share the learning. So there'll be more of that. More engagement with landowners in general, and support and advice and partnership. We've got amazing landowners that we already work in partnership with, and we'd like to do more of that. So sort of more, those sorts of things really. And then Honeygard itself, phase 2 is buildings. So we've got a collection of farm buildings that are in various states of disrepair, I would say. It's not been inhabited since 2018, so we're looking at what we do with those buildings, and the vision is that they will reflect the overall ambition for the site, and that we will develop the buildings around science and research, wetland and lowland peatland restoration, really. So looking at how we can use the buildings to further the evidence sort of locally, but also nationally and internationally on lowland peatland restoration.
Super cool. And what about you? What's the next big adventure for you? So clearly throughout every step of the way, it's been about positive impact. Every chapter you've had has been about giving back to others. What does the next 12 months look like for you?
Oh, I've got lots that I want to do at Somerset Wildlife Trust at the moment. So, you know, that's keeping me very busy. I've got 2 children, 17 and 13.
Wow. I'm not ready for my kids to be teenagers yet at all.
Yeah.
Mine are 5 and 7,
It's
so...
fun. Different set of challenges, definitely. So we've got, you know, A-levels happening and university potentially looming, which is going to cost a fortune. So,
Yes, it is.
you know, there's quite a lot going on. Really, not looking to make any big changes, definitely not in the next.
Oh, it sounds like you've got plenty on your plate anyway. Jodie, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a lovely journey through your incredible career and the exciting things you're doing now, and you're going to have to come back when the next few acquisitions kick in and talk about those as well.
I would love to. Thank you
very
for
much.
having me.
Bye, guys.